These days, it's not unusual for a brand to send me in a watch for review. However, what is unusual is to be completely blown away by that watch the first time I see it. A few months ago, a small Norwegian microbrand named Straum got in touch with me and asked if I wanted to check out their latest watch, the Opphav, which is inspired by Norwegian nature. From the stock images, it looked to be a cool, creative sports watch. But the stock images didn't quite portray just how good looking this thing is in person. It didn't prepare me for the subtle textures and colors of the dial, or the depth of the design. After getting this thing out of the watch box and getting it into some real light, I was immediately taken aback. This is easily the best looking microbrand dial I've seen this year. Heck, maybe even every year I've done this channel. And I'm hopeful, as well as honestly a bit nervous, that the images I'm trying to create can do this watch justice. That I can give you an idea of what it really looks like. Now, before I jump into this one, I do need to give you a couple quick notes. The first of which is that this watch was provided by Straum and they're not asking for it back, hence the promotional tag at the top. And the other thing is that this isn't a new watch they sent me. The owners of the brand organized this small expedition to Berenberg, the world's most northern active volcano. One of the company's taglines is that these are watches for explorers and adventurers, so they brought along some of their own watches to prove that. Which to me makes this specific watch infinitely more cooler. But as a result, you may also notice a few small scratches and dings in it, so just bear that in mind as we go forward. That said, let's get to it and let's start off with the specs. And this is where if you're in the 40mm and under ride or die club, you're going to be a little disappointed, as the Opphav is 41mm. However, lug to lug is still fairly short at 46.6mm, making it a watch that's still pretty comfortable for a wide variety of wrist sizes. Total thickness is a modest 11.5, and that does include a detailed case back and a double dome sapphire with AR, as well as 100 meters of water resistance, 22mm lug width, and it's all powered by Sellita SW200 movement. Before we move on to the dial, which is obviously the main attraction here, let's talk about the case for a minute. And the case is excellently done. It's 316L stainless with a great finish. While the design combines angular edges with a curvy sidewall, everything here is smooth to the touch. It's a mostly brushed finish, reinforcing that tool watch or explorer watch nature. Yet there are some polished beveled edges here helping to highlight and define the overall silhouette. There's a lot to like here, but two things stood out to me. The first is this seamless transition between the almost non-existent lugs and the strap. Really well done here, as well as the sunburst pattern sitting on top of the thin, clean bezel, which does overall help to highlight the dial, even though it's one that really doesn't need any more help grabbing your attention. At the right, we have a simple signed crown nestled in between polished crown guards. The crown is fairly easy to get a hold of, but it's not screwed down, and this is maybe one of the few things I'd change about the Opphav. Turning the watch over, you get a glimpse of a beautifully designed case back. On the edges, you have all the pertinent information, while a 3D stamped image of a Norwegian fjord opens up across the midline, with these small sapphire cutouts sitting just above and below that image, letting you still get a glimpse of the movement and the rotor as it goes around. Overall, this is just a fantastic case back, maybe one of the more beautiful ones I've seen that forms a perfect balance between form and function. Almost, except there is one thing. And originally, I was just so taken with the design that it took me a while to notice that there were no notches or screws here on the case back. Straum lists this as being a press-fit mounted caseback, or in other words, it's a snap-on caseback. And longtime viewers know how I feel about snap-on casebacks. I just hate them, and especially on more expensive watches. Now, to be fair, looking at this from more of a design perspective, I can completely understand why they did it. Everything here is lined up and just gives a cleaner, streamlined look. So I understand, and heck, I'd even say they're somewhat justified here, but it still bugs me that it's there. For you, you may not care. But anyway, let's move on to the dial. which I think more than makes up for this. The dial here is nothing short of gorgeous. It's as good as anything I've ever seen from Seiko, and that does include my Glacier Marine Master Reduced. The dial here is stamped steel, which then has layers of lacquer applied to it to create the 3D textures and colors. Then, on top of all of that, you still have polished indices applied, creating another layer of texture and color. Now, thanks to the slimmer bezel, for its size, this is a watch that has a very wide and expansive dial. It's just one that goes on and on when you take it in. Currently, there are 4 different colorways, 2 of which are unfortunately currently sold out. Hopefully, sometime soon they come back in stock, but in the meantime, if you really can't wait, there is also a Damascus steel version of this watch, which is a bit more, of course. With this blue colorway, the blue and those gentle ripples change as they move around in the light, going from a dark blue to a light teal, which then also progressively gets darker as you get to the outer edge. It's at that outer edge that you meet one of the more unusual design elements of the Opphav, where it has this sheer drop-off with a sunken chapter ring. It's unusual, but also very cool, and I think it adds a ton of depth to the dial. And especially when you pair it with the applied indices, some of which act as a bridge sitting over that gap, connecting the dial to the very edge of the case. It's beautiful and interestingly done, and part of me wonders if this was just a design choice, or if they were inspired by some of the old Norse legends. The ones with Midgard being a flat disc, and that disc being surrounded by a serpent biting its own tail, which could be the chapter ring. Or I just could be reading way too much into this. Either way, it's really cool and just mesmerizing to look at. Then, sitting on top of everything, you have a pair of cricket bat looking hands that are polished like the indices, with a wide strip of BGW9 going down the middle. The hands here are just about the perfect length for the watch, but there is something about them that just kind of throws me off a little bit. Maybe they're a little wide, or maybe a little flat for this particular dial. I'm not sure, but it does still kind of bug me a bit. Let me know what you think about them down below. But regardless what you think about the design, there's a nice contrast here in terms of materials and colors, so those hands do come through very clearly. Then, of course, you have the standard text and the branding on the watch. Text at the bottom is really, really fine, almost unreadable fine, but that does help keep it from being overly distracting. Then, sitting at the top, you have the brand name and the applied logo. And I actually really do like the logo here. I like how it's almost cut off here, like it's rising out of the water, or maybe rising out of the branding. Looking at this dial, the subtle ripples in its texture and gentle change in the color as it goes out to the outer edge, and I can't help but think that I'm looking downward at small waves moving as they cross a body of water. And in some ways, I like that this is eye-catching, but not over the top. At least, not over the top when you first see it. I honestly think that when you're wearing this and walking around, it's still somewhat subtle. It's not until you start to examine it up close that it really draws you in. But on top of all of that, it's still a very functional watch. The polished hands and the indices with the white luminous paint come out clearly from that seabed, making this a watch that's really easy to read, and especially with that wide expansive dial. The only thing here I'd really change about it would be to make it a tad bit smaller. Not by much, maybe just a millimeter. A dial this wide and this expansive, I think would work even if it was just a little bit smaller. Lume is also another area where I was pleasantly surprised. It's pretty good, with a nice bright BGW9 application on the hands and the indices, creating a very interesting looking Lume profile. And this is one that should go the distance throughout the night, as in my longevity tests, it easily outpaced a Seiko Diver, which is great, regardless of whatever type of watch you think this is or that it's trying to be. With regard to the movement, the Opphav has a Sellita SW200. Great movement. It's a Swiss ETA-based clone, and for the price range, it fits in perfectly here. Which is something I'd also say about the strap. It's a good vegetable tan leather. It's a nice texture, good flexibility, and a very cool custom buckle. But even if you don't like this strap, it is quick release, so you can change it at any time. Personally, I would have preferred it if it had a 20mm strap over this 22. But 22 does fit the design better, and it does quickly taper down to 20 before the buckle. So it's still very comfortable on the wrist. The shorter lug to lug and lowered center of gravity keep it squarely on the center of your wrist, right where it should be and right where you can admire it some more. Visually, I'd say this watch has a much larger presence than it is, and all of that is thanks to that wide expansive dial. So I'd say it looks more like a 42, even though it wears like a 41. Lastly, let's talk price and value, and this is where things get a little bit sticky. Overall, it's a great watch, but all those great things do add up. So with the Opphav, you're looking at an MSRP of €829, which I believe is right around 820 bucks US. There's also that Damascus steel version, but that is a little bit more. Either way, you're probably thinking that's a lot of money from a brand I've never heard of, and you're not wrong there. Now, I can tell you that the watch is really well made, with the quality of the design and the dial being superb. No watch is ever perfect, and there are some things I would change to make this more like me, like, say, getting rid of that snap-on case back. Yet, despite that, the only other real negative thing that I can bring against this one might be that price. The rest is great, and even then, while that price is a tad high, I still think it's within reason. Just when you consider everything you're getting, and especially how unique this watch is. Looking around, the only other watch that I've seen lately that comes close to it would be the newer Teal Zelos Aurora. But the images of the Aurora that I've seen, it has a very different texture on the dial. That one seems to be more hammered in, creating this wider and more regular pattern. Whereas here, the textures and colors are finer. It's a much more of a subtle transition. Where that one seems very much Zelos, this one almost seems like it's a cocktail time version of a field watch. Where you still get that amazing and mesmerizing dial, but instead of a dress watch, they've put it into a fairly capable platform, one that's ready for most things life will throw at you. So bottom line, great watch, beautiful dial, so price. And if you're someone that really likes clean, straightforward designs, then this elaborate kaleidoscope of colors is not going to be for you. There's a lot going on here. But if you are one who's fallen in love with this design, then this is one I'd recommend. And that is the Straum Opphav in a nutshell. Now, as usual, let me know what you think about this one down below, or if you know another watch that's similar that does this better. And I also want to preemptively apologize to any of the native Norwegians out there, just for any of my mispronunciations. I try, but I don't always get it right, and especially as I'm trying to record. But as always, you guys know what to do down below. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.